The forest had always been my sanctuary, the soft whisper of wind through the pines and the silver glow of the moon weaving a quiet rhythm around me. Yet tonight, even in the comforting familiarity, something felt different, as if the air itself held its breath. I walked barefoot along the soft moss, the dew kissing my skin and the scent of earth and pine filling my senses. A small lantern swinging gently in my hand, casting trembling shadows that danced across the trees like memories of forgotten nights. My heart beat in sync with the distant call of owls, the rustle of leaves under unseen feet, and the gentle lapping of the stream nearby, a lullaby that had always eased my worries. Normally, nights like this brought me peace, moments where I could forget the expectations of the pack and the weight of the mantle I would one day inherit as Luna. Yet tonight a quiet tension settled over the woods, subtle and almost imperceptible, like the faint tremor before a distant storm. I paused near a cluster of wildflowers, brushing my fingers over their delicate petals, their fragility grounding me in a world I understood, even as a flicker of movement in the periphery drew my gaze. At first, I thought it might be a deer, or perhaps the night wind tossing shadows across the trunks, but then I saw it, a single red glimmer, fleeting and deliberate, nestled in the darkness beyond the trees. My breath caught, though my body remained still, instinctual nerves pricking like the gentle sting of a distant warning. Kael. I didn't know his name yet, only the sense of power and secrecy he carried, a presence that shifted silently across the forest floor, muscles taut beneath black fur, his left eye glowing faintly like embers in the night, observing without a sound, blending with shadows as though he were both part of the world and apart from it. He did not move toward me, did not make a sound, yet I felt his awareness like a pulse against my own heartbeat, an unspoken acknowledgement that the forest held more than its quiet surface, that I was not alone even in my solitude. The stars shimmered above and for a moment, the world felt poised between calm and something unnameable, a delicate balance that I could almost touch but could not fully grasp. I returned my gaze to the flowers, inhaling their sweet scent, trying to steady my thoughts, telling myself it was only imagination, yet the flicker of Kael's eye lingered in my mind, a silent question mark threading through my thoughts. I thought of my home, of the small cabin tucked at the edge of the pack's territory, where the hearth glowed and the familiar scent of my wolf's coat and the warm cups of tea I often drank in silence reminded me of ordinary days, of laughter shared in whispers and quiet nights spent planning the future I barely understood. Yet even there, in the memory of comfort, a sense of restlessness tugged at me, as though destiny had begun to stir just beyond the edges of my vision. I crouched beside the stream, letting the cool water run through my fingers, watching as it reflected the moonlight in fractured silver patterns, thinking of the stories of the pack elders, of the old prophecies whispered only in the deepest nights, of a wolf who wandered unseen, a shadow that carried secrets and warnings in equal measure, a figure whose name was never spoken aloud but whose presence was known to those who truly listened. And even as I told myself these were just tales, Kael's faint, glowing eye appeared once more between the trunks, motionless and patient, like a question the world itself was asking me, a riddle I did not yet know how to solve. I shivered, not from cold but from the awareness that my ordinary life, quiet, safe, contained within the folds of the familiar forest, was not as secure as I had believed. Something waited, something patient, something that watched and waited for the right moment to reveal itself, and I could feel it like a low hum beneath the surface of the night. The fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns in the darkness, each glow punctuating the air with brief moments of light, and I realized how small I truly was beneath the canopy of ancient trees. Yet how vast the world of mysteries surrounding me could be, stretching far beyond the comfortable boundaries of my known life. I rose slowly, brushing damp leaves from my cloak, listening to the distant echo of my own footsteps mingling with the soft sounds of the forest, aware that Kael's eyes followed me still, a quiet observer whose motives were hidden and whose timing could not yet be predicted. I wanted to call out, to ask who he was or why he watched me from the shadows, yet something restrained me, a cautious intuition that the forest itself, and Kael, would answer in time and not before I was ready. As I turned toward home, the wind shifted, carrying with it a scent both strange and familiar, a hint of earth and smoke, of a presence that seemed too deliberate to be accidental, brushing against my senses like a soft warning. I paused again, glancing over my shoulder toward where the shadows deepened between the trees, and for the briefest moment, Kael's glowing red eye met mine once more, unblinking, silent, and impossible to ignore, before disappearing entirely into the blackness. I swallowed, the weight of anticipation settling in my chest like a tangible thing. A quiet pull that I could neither name nor resist, and I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that the ordinary world I had known was already slipping from my grasp. Something was coming, something that would unravel the life I thought I understood, and Kael the shadowed rogue was already there, watching, waiting, and perhaps guiding the first steps of a destiny I had yet to claim. And as I stepped into the faint light of my cabin, the flickering lantern casting long shadows across the walls, I felt it, the soft, almost imperceptible brush of change in the air, a whisper of something supernatural yet intimate, a quiet prelude to a story that had begun without my knowing, a secret threaded into the moonlight that would not release me, and Kael's red eye, glowing in my mind's eye, lingered like the final note of a song I had yet to hear. The next morning the forest felt different, though I could not say how. The mist hung heavier among the trees, curling like fingers along the riverbank, and every sound, every rustle of leaves, every bird call, seemed sharper, more deliberate, as if the world itself were holding its breath in anticipation, and I found my own heartbeat echoing back at me with a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. I wandered along the familiar path toward the small meadow where the pack often gathered, yet each step felt oddly out of place, the moss beneath my feet softer, the air carrying scents that were both new and strangely familiar, like memories half forgotten, stirring feelings I could not name. Even the sunlight seemed different, striking the canopy in glimmers that formed fleeting, shifting patterns on the forest floor. And for the first time, I noticed how often my gaze drifted to the shadows at the edge of vision, expecting, fearing, something I could not yet define. It was there, just beyond the old oak where the stream curved, that I saw him again. Kael crouched low, his dark, muscular form blending seamlessly with the trees, the faint glow of his left eye catching a stray sunbeam as if to mark his presence without revealing it fully, and I felt a shiver roll down my spine, equal parts awe and unease. He did not move toward me, did not make a sound, yet I could sense him observing, measuring, and perhaps testing me, a silent predator or protector whose intentions were as inscrutable as the forest itself. That day the changes began in ways I could not ignore. A sudden surge of energy while climbing the ridge, an unexplainable clarity in my thoughts when the pack discussed territory disputes, a faint sense that the wind carried whispers meant only for me, and everywhere I went, the subtle marks of Kael's presence, broken twigs, paw prints too large to be any of the pack, a shadow crossing the trees at the edge of my vision, hinted that I was not walking alone, that something was nudging my path, guiding me without revealing the full story. At first, I questioned my own senses, telling myself it was the thrill of the forest, the natural rhythm of life waking fully in the spring season. Yet even as I tried to dismiss it, small coincidences seemed to align unervingly. A sudden rustle in the leaves whenever I debated aloud my duties, a gust of wind that bent the branches to point toward hidden clearings, the faint glimmer of Kael's red eye reflected in puddles of rain I had not noticed before. By afternoon the pack was gathered near the clearing, their voices a mixture of laughter and low growls, yet I found myself distracted by sensations that could not be explained. An odd tightening in my chest when the alpha spoke, a pull in the wind toward a distant hill, and the sensation of being observed, not just by packmates but by something else, something that lingered just out of reach. I glimpsed Kael again, perched atop a rocky outcrop, silent and still, and though his red eye met mine for only a heartbeat, it conveyed 1,000 questions and a warning unspoken. Not all is as it seems, Luna. Watch closely, or you may miss the thread of your own fate. I tried to call out, but the words stuck in my throat, and when I blinked, he was gone, leaving only a faint imprint in the dew-soaked grass, as though he had never been there at all. As the day wore on, these subtle shifts continued. Objects I had left in a particular place appeared slightly moved, scents that had been familiar were tinged with an unknown trace, and an inexplicable pull led me toward the northern edge of the forest, a place I had seldom visited, where the shadows grew longer and the trees older, their roots tangled like the threads of a story I was only beginning to read. When I arrived, I felt the weight of the forest pressing around me, the wind whispering through the branches in patterns that almost seemed to form words, and there, faint but unmistakable, were paw prints I did not recognize, large, precise, deliberate, a silent message that someone or something had been waiting, observing, perhaps guiding me to this very spot. A sudden chill ran through my spine as I looked up and thought I saw Kael's dark silhouette against the dying light, perched high in the branches, as still as a statue yet alive with intent, and I realized with an odd mixture of fear and curiosity that he had been here all along, marking the moment without revealing his purpose. My mind raced with questions I could not answer, and though the forest was quiet, I felt an unspoken energy thrumming in the air, a pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own, urging me forward into unknown paths, into choices that would shape more than just my life but the destiny of the pack itself. And as I turned to make my way home, I felt the soft brush of wind against my cheek, carrying a scent both familiar and strange, like smoke and pine, like a warning folded into a promise, and I knew without understanding why, that Kael's eyes would follow me, watching from the shadows, waiting for the precise moment to reveal a truth I was not yet ready to face. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the surge of emotion and the inexplicable energy coursing through me, telling myself it was only the forest, only the play of light and shadow, only the natural rhythm of life, and yet, deep in my bones, I knew it was more. Something had shifted in the quiet world I had thought I knew, and the rogue wolf with the glowing red eye was the constant, silent witness to it all, threading his presence through the edges of my life like an unseen hand guiding the first notes of a story that had only just begun. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in muted gold and violet, I caught the faintest reflection of red in the stream, almost imperceptible, and felt the pull of the night ahead, the promise of change and the quiet certainty that Kael, the shadowed observer, would remain just out of reach, a silent herald of mysteries I could not yet name. The morning fog clung to the forest like a soft veil, and as I stepped into the clearing where the pack often gathered, I felt the air shift, thickening with anticipation I could not yet name. The chatter of the pack hushed almost imperceptibly as a figure emerged from the trees, tall and commanding, yet with a quiet, magnetic presence that made every movement deliberate, graceful, and impossible to ignore. He was not the alpha I had expected, not the one whose voice I had grown accustomed to hearing in the council, but something more, something deeper, as if the forest itself had bent to guide him to this place, and I felt my heart stumble in ways I had never known, an unfamiliar mixture of awe and fear threading through me. His eyes caught mine immediately, dark, penetrating, yet tinged with an unspoken understanding, as though he could see the thoughts I had kept even from myself, and for a moment the world around me seemed to blur, leaving only the sound of the wind brushing through the trees and the quickened rhythm of my own pulse. Behind me, a shadow shifted and my instincts prickled as I realized Kael was there once more, crouched in the underbrush, muscles coiled like a taut string, his glowing red eye briefly flashing as if to punctuate the moment with warning, and then a voice, low and almost carried by the wind, whispered, "Your alpha isn't who you think he is." My breath caught, and I glanced at the alpha before me, sensing the weight of Kael's words without fully understanding their meaning, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. The newcomer moved closer, his footsteps silent despite the rustling leaves, and every movement seemed to draw the forest into orbit around him, as if the birds paused mid-flight and the wind stilled to witness him, and I felt a pull, magnetic and undeniable, tugging me toward him even as caution lingered at the edges of my mind. He spoke, and the sound of his voice was calm, resonant, and filled with a warmth that seemed at odds with the tension that hummed beneath the surface, offering words of reassurance to the pack while simultaneously sending a ripple through my chest that made me question everything I had thought I knew about loyalty and bond. Kael remained in the shadows, his gaze unwavering, red eye flashing at intervals like a warning light, as if he were charting the trajectory of the meeting, gauging which words or gestures would matter, and what influence might ripple into the future. The alpha I knew, the one officially bound to me, lingered nearby, yet every glance he cast seemed to falter against the gravity of this newcomer, and I felt the subtle, disorienting tug of realization that the bonds we had assumed were unbreakable were already shifting, bending beneath the pressure of destiny I could not yet name. The newcomer's presence was magnetic not because he commanded attention through force or fear, but because every subtle detail, the tilt of his head, the way sunlight caught the edge of his hair, the calm steadiness of his hands, spoke of a power that was both quiet and unassailable, one that felt in tune with the forest, with the pack, and with something deep inside me that I had yet to fully understand. I noticed how the pack members gravitated toward him unconsciously, drawn by a trust that seemed instinctual rather than learned, and how my heart mirrored their response even as a voice in my mind reminded me that loyalty was a bond, not a feeling, and yet, I could not shake the resonance of his presence. Kael shifted slightly in the shadows, a faint growl vibrating in the space between us, and once again his whisper threaded through the air. "See the truth beneath the masks, Luna, or the path you walk will not be your own." I shivered involuntarily, and though I tried to focus on the newcomer, Kael's words lingered like smoke curling in the air, impossible to ignore. The magnetic figure extended his hand, not in command but in greeting, a simple gesture that held unspoken meaning, and when our eyes met again, I felt the brush of a connection that was as old as the forest itself, something that resonated beyond the rational, beyond explanation, tethering me in a way that demanded attention, and yet came without pressure, without demand, allowing me to feel both curiosity and caution simultaneously. My mind raced with questions. Who was he really? Why had he appeared now? And how did Kael know him or know me? And most importantly, why did my pulse respond to him in a way it had never responded to anyone else? As though the rhythm of my heart recognized something in him that I had only glimpsed in dreams and half-remembered legends. The clearing seemed to hold its breath as time stretched, each second weighted with potential, and I sensed that this encounter, brief and fleeting though it might seem, would mark the turning point of everything I thought I knew about the pack, about loyalty, and about the bond that had tethered me to the wrong alpha. Kael's silhouette flickered between the trees one last time, a silent witness, his red eye glowing like a lantern in the shadowed forest. Then he vanished, leaving me with the newcomer's gaze and the echo of his words ringing in my mind, an unspoken promise that the ordinary world I had known was already shifting beneath my feet. And as the magnetic figure spoke again, this time directing his attention to the pack but still brushing my awareness, I realized that I was at the edge of a decision I could not yet name, a threshold where curiosity and instinct collided, and somewhere deep in the forest, Kael's presence reminded me silently that the choices ahead would not only define my path but uncover truths I was not yet ready to face. And yet, I could not turn away. The days that followed the newcomer's arrival blurred the line between ordinary and strange, each morning bringing a subtle tension that I could feel in the small pulse of the forest, in the way sunlight broke through the canopy in uneven shards, and in the hush that seemed to fall over the pack whenever someone unseen, moved just beyond the edge of sight. Dreams haunted my nights, vivid and fragmented, carrying scents of the forest in stormed patterns, the rushing of water that I could not trace, and flashes of Kael's glowing red eye peering through shadows as though warning me of truths I had yet to comprehend. His silent presence threaded into the currents of my unconscious mind, guiding me toward questions I had never thought to ask. I awoke each dawn with the lingering echo of a low, rumbling growl, half dream and half memory, and as I moved through my days, I began noticing coincidences too sharp to dismiss. A packmate leaving a note in a clearing that seemed to mirror a phrase I had muttered in a dream, a fallen branch pointing toward paths I had no reason to explore, and the stranger's voice, magnetic, calm, intertwining in my thoughts, carrying reassurance while stirring unrest. His words lingering long after he had returned to the forest depths. The wrong alpha's presence, once a comforting constant, felt suddenly heavier, more rigid, as though the bond we had taken for granted trembled with each new shift in the air. And yet the newcomer's gaze lingered in my mind, as if reminding me that the world I thought I knew was merely the surface of a deeper story, one written in silence, in glances, and in the subtle movements of a rogue wolf I could not fully interpret. Kael's appearances became almost imperceptible, a shadow brushing the tree line at dawn, a flicker of red in the evening mist, paw prints too deliberate to belong to any pack member, all carrying a warning that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears, and a phrase threaded through my thoughts like a chant. Watch closely, Luna, or the threads will unravel before your eyes. At first, I dismissed these signs as imagination, as the natural rhythm of a forest alive with motion, but the pull was undeniable, tugging at my instincts, urging me to question the alpha's decisions, my own reactions, and the very nature of loyalty itself. During pack meetings, I noticed how small decisions suddenly had weight, how the alpha's calm directives sometimes faltered under the scrutiny of subtle signs, and how the stranger, though distant, seemed to ripple the pack's focus like a stone thrown into still water. His presence felt in ways no one else could articulate. Dreams continued to weave into reality. I would awaken with scents, textures, and sounds that did not belong in my bedroom, hints of places I had never seen yet somehow known, each one accompanied by the faintest reflection of Kael's eye, the ember-red glow like a lantern marking the corners of my awareness, telling me something was shifting, though I could not yet name what. By midday, a strange sense of anticipation pressed at my chest, And every choice felt heavier, more consequential, as though invisible threads bound my steps to events I could not yet predict, and I began to notice patterns. The wind brushing against me in a certain way when decisions needed to be questioned, the sway of leaves signaling unseen paths, the reflection of sunlight off a stream that pointed toward discoveries waiting beyond the forest edge. Even the smallest interactions carried weight. A passing glance from the alpha seemed to linger longer than normal, a subtle nod from a packmate carried hidden meaning, and the newcomer's calm presence, though physically distant, shaped the rhythm of the forest in ways I could feel but not yet see, a quiet reminder that nothing was as static as I had believed. As evening fell, I wandered alone to the riverbank, drawn by instinct more than reason, and found myself tracing patterns in the sand, noticing the subtle imprint of claws that did not belong to any pack member, too deliberate, too precise to be accidental. And there, at the edge of my vision, Kael's shadow shifted once more, crouched in a space between the trees and moonlight, muscles coiled like a predator, eyes glowing faintly, observing without moving. His presence both comforting and terrifying, a silent sentinel of the threads weaving around me. I felt the tension rise as I crouched to study the prints, a chill running down my spine even as the air carried the scent of spring blooms, and I realized that these markings were not just random. They were deliberate messages left for me, guiding me, testing me, pulling me toward awareness of the truth that the world I thought I understood was already changing beneath my feet. My chest tightened with a mixture of awe and fear as I considered Kael's cryptic influence, the magnetic stranger, and the rigid alpha who had once felt like the center of my world. And in that moment, I understood that the ordinary life I had clung to, the quiet mornings, the familiar routines, the sense of safety within the pack, was no longer a fixed point. The forest seemed alive with hints of destiny, with currents that pulled me in directions I could neither resist nor fully comprehend, and the threads of past and present, loyalty and instinct, began to tangle in ways that made my pulse quicken and my mind spin with possibilities. As night approached, the first stars emerging through the thinning clouds, I paused atop a small rise overlooking the clearing, and there, in the soft glow of the moon, Kael appeared one final time for the day, crouched and silent, red eye flickering like an ember reflecting the fire of things unseen, and though he did not speak, the weight of his gaze pressed into me with clarity. Something was coming that would shift everything, that would challenge the bonds I had believed were immutable, and force me to make choices that would echo far beyond the boundaries of the forest, the pack, and my own understanding. The wind swirled around me, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain, the distant howl of a wolf threading through the night like a question unanswered. And I realized as I turned toward the cabin, and the warm lights that once promised comfort, that the ordinary world I had known, soft, safe, predictable, had already begun to dissolve, replaced by something larger, something charged with destiny, mystery, and the undeniable presence of a rogue wolf who had silently marked the first threads of a story I could no longer ignore. And in the quiet space where shadow met moonlight, Kael's ember red eye lingered in my mind, a silent promise that nothing would remain as it was, that the forest, the pack, and my very life were on the cusp of change, and that the first tremor of a new reality had already begun beneath my feet, pulling me inexorably toward a truth I was not yet ready to face, but which I could not deny. The forest seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own as I spent the days walking alongside the newcomer, the one whose presence had first drawn my attention like a quiet force of gravity, and with each shared moment, the bond between us deepened in ways I had not anticipated, carried in small gestures, a hand brushing against a branch to steady me, a shared laugh at some small, absurd detail of the pack's routines, the way his gaze lingered just long enough to make me feel seen without words, and yet the world remained layered with tension, threaded by the unseen presence of Kael, crouched in shadow, red eye faintly glowing, a silent witness to our growing connection, reminding me at every turn that nothing, not even this fragile closeness, existed without consequence. We walked near the stream where sunlight fractured through the trees, laughing softly at the antics of young wolves splashing in the water, and in that simple moment I realized that connection did not always roar with declaration. It could be quiet, subtle, the brushing of hands as we adjusted for uneven terrain, the gentle encouragement when I faltered on the slick stones, the understanding that passed between glances when words felt inadequate. Kael's eye caught mine once from the underbrush, just a flicker, yet it carried weight, a quiet reminder that beneath the comfort of these moments lay currents I could not yet read, threads of destiny and secrecy weaving through every interaction, every choice shaping the bond in ways I did not yet understand. As we paused beneath an ancient oak, he spoke softly, voice steady and calm, asking about my fears, my hopes for the pack, the weight of being Luna, and I found myself answering in ways I had never voiced aloud, the words spilling from my heart as though they had been waiting for someone to hear them, and in his patient listening, I felt a resonance, a sense that I could be fully myself without judgment, yet with the full awareness that Kael's gaze lingered, a quiet reminder that freedom came with a price, and that even moments of trust were watched and measured in the shadows. Later, as we trained with the younger wolves, his encouragement was subtle but firm, guiding without overt control, allowing me to discover my own strengths, and in those moments of shared effort, the bond was cemented in trust, laughter, and unspoken understanding, the kind of connection that rippled through the air between us like the soft vibrations of a calm river. Yet beneath it, the tension of the unknown threaded through, a quiet hum that kept me alert. Kael appeared briefly atop a distant ridge, crouched and still, his red eye catching the sunlight for a heartbeat, then gone, leaving only a faint sense of his awareness threading through my thoughts, like an invisible reminder that our growing bond, though genuine and meaningful, was not untouched by forces I could not yet control or fully comprehend. That evening, as we walked back to the clearing together, the sky painted in muted gold and violet, he spoke again, asking questions that lingered long after the conversation ended, about loyalty, about choice, about what it meant to be part of something larger than oneself, and in his words, I recognized an echo of the uncertainty that had begun to pull at me since the moment Kael had first appeared. Subtle yet insistent, shaping my understanding of the pack, of destiny, and of my own heart. The alpha I had been bound to felt distant in comparison, his presence less commanding in the way that mattered most, and I found myself analyzing every glance, every tone, every decision in a new light, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily upon me even as a fragile hope grew alongside the bond forming with the newcomer. As we reached the edge of the forest, Kael emerged one final time for the day, crouched among the roots of a fallen tree, his red eye glowing with a cryptic intensity, and though he did not speak, the energy he radiated carried a message that lingered long after he disappeared, leaving me with an unshakable sense that even in moments of connection and trust, choices carried consequences that could alter the path of everything I had once taken for granted. And then, just as twilight settled fully across the clearing, an unexpected revelation struck me, a small, unintended gesture from the newcomer, a hand brushing against mine as he passed me a fallen branch to help the younger wolves, a gesture so ordinary yet infused with consideration, patience and warmth, and in that instant, I understood not only the depth of our growing bond but also the power of subtle connection, the quiet influence of choice and trust, and the unspoken truth that destiny, though guided by unseen hands like Kael's, was being shaped in ways I could feel yet could not fully predict, a revelation that left my heart racing, my mind alight with possibility, and my sense of the ordinary world forever changed in the softest, most profound way, pulling me inexorably forward into a story that would test loyalty, courage, and the strength of bonds I had only begun to discover. The morning air was thick with mist, curling between the trees like fingers of smoke, and as I made my way to the ridge overlooking the heart of the forest, a sense of expectancy weighed upon me, a quiet tension that made every rustle of leaves and distant bird call seem amplified, as though the world itself had leaned in to witness what was about to unfold, and I felt Kael's presence before I even saw him, crouched in shadow atop a gnarled tree root, red eye glinting like a warning light in the fog, silently observing, a thread connecting him to the shifting currents of fate that I could feel but could not yet read. The newcomer, whose presence had grown magnetic in the days since we had first met, approached with careful steps, the forest bending subtly to his rhythm, each footfall deliberate, calm, commanding without forcing, and I could sense that he carried knowledge that the pack, and perhaps even I, had not yet grasped, a quiet understanding of the forest, of the unseen threads that linked every life within it, and of secrets that had been held for generations. I noticed small signs along the path, a broken branch positioned in a way that pointed toward a hidden hollow, paw prints not matching any pack member, and the faintest trace of a scent that could only belong to Kael, lingering as if to guide me toward what I was meant to see, a subtle insistence that my attention focus on more than the ordinary, on what lay beneath the surface. As we reached the edge of the ridge, the newcomer stopped, gazing over the expanse of forest and mountains beyond, and spoke in a quiet voice that carried across the mist, recounting fragments of old prophecies I had only heard in whispers from the elders, tales of a rogue wolf who moved unseen, who watched and guided the destined Luna in ways both protective and challenging, a figure who would reveal truth in pieces, testing perception and resolve alike. And as he spoke, I felt a shiver that traced along my spine, the hair on my arm standing, for every word resonated as if it had been written for me alone. Kael's presence was felt in that moment more strongly than ever. A subtle rustle in the underbrush, the glint of red reflected in a puddle, the awareness that he was near and watching, offering no intervention yet, shaping the trajectory of what was to come. A silent hand guiding me toward understanding without breaking the natural flow of events. The newcomer turned then, gaze meeting mine with a gravity that made the forest around us seem hushed, and he spoke of choices, of paths unseen, of bonds that could bind not just hearts but destinies, and I understood that what I had taken for granted, the stability of my place as Luna, the presumed certainty of the Alpha's role, even the familiar patterns of the forest, was only a veneer, a surface concealing deeper currents that had been in motion long before I was born. Small coincidences I had noticed in the previous days, the paw prints, the shadows, the subtle warnings whispered in the wind, suddenly fell into clarity, threads of a pattern I could finally perceive. Hints that my ordinary world had always been layered with unseen guidance, with prophecy, and with subtle nudges from Kael, whose cryptic presence was now unmistakable as part of this unfolding truth. I felt the air thicken with the weight of revelation as the newcomer gestured toward a cluster of ancient stones, weathered by time, carved with runes that pulsed faintly in the dim morning light, symbols I had only glimpsed in elder tales, yet now seemed to speak directly to me, revealing a truth about the connection between Luna, Alpha and Rogue, about the delicate balance of power and loyalty, and about the unseen hand that shaped events in ways both protective and perilous. Kael's red eye appeared briefly, a flash in the distance, and I sensed that he was measuring my reaction, testing my ability to grasp what was hidden, to discern the difference between fear, curiosity, and understanding, and his silent presence carried an unspoken message. See it clearly, Luna, or the path ahead will deceive you. As I traced my fingers over the carvings, the words of the prophecy whispered in my mind, fragments forming a mosaic of meaning I had not fully comprehended until now, revealing that the Alpha I had assumed was destined to lead beside me was only part of a greater story. One that included the newcomer, Kael, and a destiny that had been woven long before I had even stepped into the forest. My pulse quickened, my breath catching in my chest, as the realization hit with undeniable force. The ordinary life I had believed in, the safety and simplicity I had clung to, had been an illusion, a stage upon which unseen hands, the rogue wolf, the mysterious newcomer, and threads of fate, had always been orchestrating the next movement, shaping every choice and interaction. I glanced up, seeing Kael perched atop a distant boulder, red eye gleaming with a quiet intensity, as if confirming that the revelation was true, that my perception had finally caught up to the reality that had existed just beyond my understanding, and the weight of that knowledge settled in my chest, both thrilling and terrifying. Then, as the mist swirled around the ridge, a sudden crack of sound, a branch snapping in the distance though no wind stirred, made the newcomer and I turn simultaneously, our eyes drawn to the same point, where shadows converged unnaturally, forming shapes that hinted at movement beyond ordinary perception, and in that instant, I understood something that changed everything. The world I had believed was stable, predictable, and safe was in fact alive with forces I could not control, guided by beings whose motives were subtle, cryptic, and intertwined with destiny itself. And Kael, the rogue wolf with the red eye, was the silent architect of these revelations, threading the story together while remaining just beyond reach. I felt a rush of awareness, a surge of both fear and clarity, knowing that the forest, the pack, the newcomer, the Alpha I had assumed I knew, and Kael's silent guidance were all part of a web far larger than I had ever imagined, and in that moment, as the mist swirled around us and the runes glowed faintly in the soft morning light, a shock of understanding struck me. One choice, one glance, one overlooked sign could shift everything, and the truth I had uncovered was not just knowledge but a responsibility, a burden, and a call to action that would ripple through the pack, through the forest, and through the destiny I was only beginning to grasp, leaving me with the awareness that nothing would ever be the same again, and that the rogue wolf, silent and unseen, was already setting the next stage for what I must face. The forest no longer felt like a safe refuge. Each step I took carried the weight of uncertainty, the familiar paths bending subtly beneath an invisible tension that seemed to pulse in time with my own racing heartbeat. And even the sounds of the pack, laughter, growls and playful calls, seemed distorted, as if the ordinary world I had relied upon had begun to fracture, leaving me unsteady and acutely aware of the fragile balance I had once taken for granted, while Kael's presence threaded through every movement, silent and observing, red eye glinting from shadows hinting at danger and unseen truths without ever revealing their full meaning. And I felt the pressure of unseen forces guiding, warning, and sometimes manipulating the currents around me. The newcomer and I moved through the clearing together, our connection a tether in the growing instability, yet the weight of his presence carried its own tension. The alpha I had assumed was steady now seemed uncertain, his decisions faltering under the subtle pressures I could sense but could not yet fully identify, and I realized that my loyalty, my understanding, and even my instincts were being tested in ways that left no room for hesitation, no margin for error. Strange coincidences began to accumulate, branches fallen in unnatural positions, faint paw prints appearing in unlikely places, scents in the air that hinted at unseen movement, and Kael's red eye appeared again in the periphery, catching sunlight for a brief moment before vanishing, a cryptic reminder that the events unfolding were only part of a larger pattern, and that one misstep could ripple through the pack and the forest in unpredictable ways. Arguments erupted over territory, minor disagreements suddenly carrying weight far beyond their content, and I felt the strain of being Luna more sharply than ever, aware that my decisions now could tilt the balance of loyalty, trust, and destiny, even as the newcomer's calm influence guided me toward measured choices, and I sensed Kael watching, testing, gauging my resolve with an intensity that left a shiver in my spine. That night, as the moon rose and cast silver light across the clearing, a sudden rustle in the underbrush made both the newcomer and I pause, and there, crouched silently with muscles coiled, Kael emerged, red eye glowing, a subtle signal that the decision I was about to make would carry consequences I could not yet anticipate. The air seemed to thrum with tension, the forest holding its breath, and I understood that every choice, every glance, every word, every step was being weighed in ways I could neither see nor predict. I felt the forest itself respond to the uncertainty. Leaves trembled though the wind was still, shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally, and the pack moved with cautious energy, their instincts heightened in ways that mirrored my own growing apprehension, while the newcomer's steady presence grounded me just enough to allow thought, reflection, and action, though the pressure of the unknown remained unrelenting. A small crisis arose when two pack members strayed into a disputed area, their quarrel escalating, and I realized that my voice, my authority, and my judgment would determine the outcome. And in that moment of tension, Kael's eye flashed once more from the shadows as if to say, "Decide wisely, Luna, or the balance will shatter." The weight of his cryptic warning pressed upon me, and I recognized that the instability I felt was not only external but internal, a test of my own ability to navigate trust, loyalty, and destiny under conditions that were increasingly unpredictable. I made my choice, intervening with calm but firm direction, guiding the pack to resolve the dispute while maintaining order. Yet even as the immediate danger subsided, I knew the ripples of the event would stretch further than I could see, influencing alliances, perceptions, and the delicate threads connecting the alpha, the newcomer, and myself, while Kael remained in the shadows, observing with the patience of one who has seen outcomes I could not yet imagine. The night deepened and a sudden shift in the wind carried scents from distant parts of the forest, signals of movements unseen but intentional. A subtle reminder that the forest and its inhabitants were not the only forces at play, and that the rogue wolf's guidance was constant, enigmatic, and impossible to ignore. As I returned to my quarters, I felt the weight of choices pressing upon me, realizing that the ordinary world I had relied upon no longer existed, replaced by an unstable reality where loyalty, trust, and destiny intertwined in complex, shifting patterns, and where every decision mattered far beyond the moment in which it was made. I paused at the edge of the clearing, sensing the glowing ember of Kael's eye one last time before he vanished into the shadows, a silent sentinel marking the threshold between what had been and what must come, and in that instant, I understood that the next steps I took would not only determine the stability of the pack but also the trajectory of the bonds I had formed, the destiny I was beginning to claim, and the secrets I had yet to uncover, leaving me with a decision that weighed heavier than any I had faced before, and a forest full of whispers, shadows, and unseen currents that would carry the consequences of my choice forward, forever altering the ordinary world I had once known. The forest lay quiet under the early morning mist, and as I walked along the familiar trail toward the heart of the pack's territory, the weight of unspoken truths pressed upon me, each step revealing layers of the life I had thought I knew, memories and secrets tucked into the corners of the pack's history and my own past, threads that had been hidden beneath ordinary routines, now stirring to the surface with the subtle insistence of destiny. And Kael was there, as always, crouched low in shadow, red eye faintly gleaming, observing in silence, a reminder that revelation often came not with a shout but with subtle cues, a presence that seemed to hold both judgment and guidance in equal measure, and I felt my chest tighten at the awareness that every memory, every half-remembered tale, and every unspoken thought carried weight far beyond what I had realized. The newcomer walked beside me, quiet but attentive, his steady presence allowing the flood of emotions to pass without judgment, and in the way he looked at the pack, at me, and at the subtle changes in our surroundings, I sensed he understood more than he revealed, holding the stories of others' hearts lightly yet with respect, like a leaf floating on a river yet tethered to unseen currents. I found myself thinking about the alpha I had been bound to, realizing that beneath his apparent confidence and authority lay wounds I had never noticed, scars left by past choices and obligations that shaped him in ways both noble and fragile, and suddenly the gestures, the silences, the hesitations I had once interpreted as distance or disinterest made sense in a new bittersweet light, a mixture of admiration and sorrow threading through my thoughts as I acknowledged his humanity beyond the mask of power. Kael's shadow shifted among the trees, a silent observer whose glowing eye flickered like a signal, and though he offered no words, his presence felt like an invitation to look deeper, to see not just what was before me but what had always been, and in that quiet insistence, I began to understand how the past, the choices of those who had walked the forest before me, and the hidden stories of the pack were all interwoven, shaping every relationship, every loyalty, and every instinct I carried as Luna. As we reached the clearing where the younger wolves practiced and played, fragments of whispered tales came to mind. Stories of sacrifice, of forbidden trust, of bonds that had been tested in ways too subtle for the casual observer to detect, and I felt a shiver of recognition, an emotional resonance with struggles I had once believed unique to myself, realizing that the pack's history and the lives of those around me were a tapestry of courage, pain, and resilience, each thread influencing the present in ways unseen but deeply felt. The newcomer paused, resting a hand lightly on a branch, and told a story in soft tones, of his own past and the trials that had shaped him, of decisions made in solitude, and of the moments when loyalty and morality collided in ways that left permanent echoes in the heart, and I felt a wave of understanding, a sense that vulnerability did not weaken the bond between us but strengthened it, allowing connection to form not from obligation or fate alone, but from genuine recognition of shared truths and struggles. Kael's red eye appeared briefly in the distance, catching a sunbeam as if to punctuate the moment, a subtle acknowledgement that these revelations, though deeply personal, were only part of a larger pattern, and that my perception of loyalty, trust, and destiny would be tested further as threads long hidden began to surface. As the day stretched on, conversations and gestures, glances and silences layered upon one another, revealing nuances of character I had overlooked. The quiet pride in the alpha's measured decisions, the weight of unspoken regrets in the newcomer's calm authority, the courage and curiosity of younger pack members, and the subtle ways each heart interacted with another in patterns both conscious and instinctual, and I began to understand that the forest, the pack, and even Kael's shadowed presence were all part of a delicate ecosystem of emotion, loyalty, and choice, each influencing the other in ways that demanded attention and reflection. Then, as the sunlight slanted through the treetops in golden shafts, Kael appeared closer than I had anticipated, crouched low upon a rock at the edge of the clearing, red eye fixed upon me with a quiet intensity that made my breath catch, and though he made no move, the energy he radiated carried a message, one I could feel more than hear. Truth changes everything, Luna, and some truths will test your heart more than your mind. That statement resonated deep within me, echoing through memories I had only just begun to reconcile, stirring questions about the motivations, fears, and desires that had driven every choice I had made, every bond one had formed, and every step I had taken since the stranger's arrival. The evening approached and the forest dimmed under the softening light, the pack settling into quiet routines that had once seemed comforting yet now felt layered with complexity and depth, while the newcomer remained near, silent and supportive, understanding without needing to speak, and I realized that this day, like the mist that clung to the forest floor, had lifted only partially, revealing truths that would shape every moment to come. Then, as the final glow of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I felt a sudden, unexpected twist in the energy around me. A subtle movement in the shadows, a ripple in the air, a faint whisper of presence that did not belong to any known pack member. And in that instant, my heart clenched as the realization struck. The stories we carry, the histories we uncover, and the hidden truths we seek can shift everything, redefining who we are, what we believe, and where our loyalties must ultimately lie. And Kael, enigmatic and untouchable, had once again left his mark, a quiet, profound reminder that even in the sanctuary of revelation, the forest holds mysteries that test courage, perception, and heart, leaving me suspended between understanding and uncertainty, and knowing that the emotional currents unveiled today would ripple through tomorrow, shaping choices I had yet to make and truths I was only beginning to face. The forest, once a familiar refuge, now seemed heavy with unspoken anxieties, each step I took echoing with the weight of uncertainty. The sunlight fractured and fleeting, shadows stretching unnaturally across the underbrush as if reflecting the tension that had begun to coil through the pack like a living thing. And I felt Kael's presence almost immediately, crouched in a distant thicket, red eye glimmering through the haze, watching, assessing, and offering no answers, only cryptic signals that stirred unease within me. A quiet reminder that the forest itself was no longer safe from the shifting currents of trust and doubt. The newcomer's calm, steady demeanor had become my anchor in recent days, yet even his composed presence could not entirely dispel the creeping sense of fracture. The subtle frictions among pack members now sharpened into silent confrontations, misread glances, and whispered concerns that left my chest tight and my mind spinning, and I began to notice how easily hope could flicker and dim in a world built on loyalty and instinct. Minor disputes, once easily resolved, now carried the weight of suspicion and hesitation, and I found myself questioning motives, actions, and even my own instincts as Luna. The authority I had relied upon now challenged not by overt aggression but by quiet uncertainty that could unsettle even the most steadfast heart, leaving me vulnerable to the unpredictable tides of emotion that swirled among those I had trusted implicitly. Kael's red eye appeared again, briefly catching the sunlight, and though he remained at the periphery, his silent presence felt like both a warning and a guide, a subtle thread linking the unfolding tensions to forces I could not yet perceive, urging vigilance while allowing events to unfold naturally, a constant reminder that observation alone can shape choices as powerfully as intervention. As the day stretched on, the newcomer and I moved through the clearing, his attention careful, measured, attuned to the smallest shift in posture, glance, or scent that might hint at discord, and I realized how delicate the balance of connection, trust, and loyalty had become, how easily one misstep, one misunderstood gesture, could unravel the fragile peace we had struggled to maintain, while Kael's subtle indications, a paw print positioned in a seemingly random spot, a rustle in the underbrush at the perfect moment, a brief flash of his red eye, pointed me toward awareness of the threads at play, guiding me without words, keeping the edge of danger just visible enough to sharpen every decision I made. I watched as disagreements among pack members escalated subtly, whispers growing into pointed looks, hesitation turning to avoidance, and a rising tension knotted in my chest, pulling tight like the strings of a bow ready to release an arrow, while the newcomer's presence offered both reassurance and a quiet challenge, encouraging me to act with discernment, to navigate the instability with patience, and to hold fast to the bonds I had worked to strengthen, all while understanding that some things lay beyond even my careful attention. Kael appeared one final time as the sun dipped lower, crouched in the shadow of a gnarled tree, his gaze fixed on a moment of miscommunication between the alpha and a trusted pack member, and I felt the intensity of his observation press upon me, a silent message threading into my awareness. The threads are fraying, Luna. Choices made now will echo farther than you imagine. That warning, so quiet yet insistent, reverberated in my chest as the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. By evening, the situation reached a breaking point. A minor dispute that should have been simple escalated, voices raised in frustration though no one raised a hand, and the air crackled with the potential for division, each wolf sensing the strain without knowing the source, the invisible tension binding us together yet threatening to tear us apart simultaneously. And I felt my own instincts, honed as Luna, pulled in multiple directions, balancing authority, empathy, and foresight as carefully as one might balance a fragile crystal on a knife's edge. A sudden shift in the wind brought the faintest scent of Kael, a reminder that unseen forces were at play. And in that moment, I understood that the forest, the pack, and even the newcomer's presence were part of a complex web I could not control, where perception, instinct, and loyalty were tested continuously, where hope could flare and fade in a heartbeat, and where even the smallest action could trigger unforeseen consequences. As night approached, I found myself standing alone on the ridge, the forest quiet except for distant calls and the soft rustle of leaves, and Kael's red eye appeared once more, glowing faintly in the darkness, a presence both protective and inscrutable, his message clear though unspoken. Observation and patience were as crucial as action, and the challenges ahead would demand both. Then, as I glanced back toward the clearing, I saw the newcomer momentarily separated from the pack, tension in his posture, uncertainty mirrored in the way he moved, and I felt a pang of fear, knowing that even those closest to me could be swept into the instability that now defined our world. While Kael watched, silent, the rogue guardian of secrets, his cryptic presence threading through the moment, leaving me with an unshakable sense of vulnerability and anticipation. And so I stood there, suspended between hope and apprehension, heart taut with tension, aware that the choices I made, the loyalty I maintained, and the trust one extended or withheld, would determine not only the survival of the bonds we had forged but also the fragile equilibrium of the pack itself, the forest trembling with silent anticipation, and the enigmatic figure of Kael lingering in shadow, red eye glowing faintly like a promise and a warning, leaving the night charged with uncertainty, and me poised on the edge of a separation I could not yet resolve, the stakes higher than they had ever been, and the story of loyalty, trust, and destiny far from concluded. The night settled over the forest like a heavy velvet curtain, shadows stretching long and deep, and I found myself standing in the center of the clearing, heart pounding as the tension among the pack coiled tighter than I had ever felt, the air thick with expectation, fear, and unspoken truths, while Kael crouched at the edge of the trees, red eye glowing faintly like a distant warning, watching, weighing, waiting for the precise moment to make his presence felt, and even from that distance, his energy seemed to ripple through the clearing, subtle but undeniable, as though he were a current beneath the surface of events, invisible yet shaping everything with quiet precision. The newcomer stood beside me, calm yet tense, eyes scanning the pack members whose whispers and glances betrayed uncertainty and rising fear, and I felt the weight of leadership pressing upon me, each choice I might make carrying consequences far beyond the immediate, each action potentially reshaping trust, loyalty, and destiny itself, and I understood that tonight would demand courage, clarity, and sacrifices I had only glimpsed in fragments before. Voices rose, not in anger but in rising insistence, each pack member pressing their perspective, their fears, their loyalties, and the subtle cracks in the harmony I had worked to maintain widened, threatening to spill over into chaos, while I fought to hold the space between order and anarchy, balance and rupture, intuition and reason, and Kael's presence, though silent, seemed to sharpen every instinct, every perception, as though his glowing red eye could pierce not only the shadows but the very intentions and hearts of those around me. A sudden revelation from one of the elder wolves, a secret carefully hidden, a truth that had been whispered only in fragments, surfaced in the midst of the confrontation, and it struck the clearing with the force of inevitability, sending murmurs through the pack and leaving me breathless with the weight of the implications, for loyalty, love, and leadership were now entangled in a web of deception, choices, and destiny far more complex than I had imagined, and every eye turned toward me as the one who would guide the resolution, the one whose decisions would define the night and the balance of the pack. The newcomer's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a gesture both grounding and charged with silent understanding, and I felt the current of connection between us deepen even in the storm of uncertainty, yet I knew the resolution could not come without cost, without testing the limits of trust, courage, and the fragile bonds that held us together, and Kael's presence loomed at the periphery, silent yet potent, as if the rogue wolf were weighing the unfolding choices, assessing my instincts and preparing for the precise moment when subtle intervention might be required. As the confrontation intensified, the forest itself seemed to respond. The wind rose and fell like a pulse, shadows twisted across the clearing, and even the moonlight seemed to bend and shimmer, reflecting the emotional turbulence that rippled through every heart present, and I realized that this was more than a test of leadership. It was a test of perception, resilience, and the ability to navigate the unseen currents of destiny, loyalty, and trust, while remaining true to the path I had only just begun to claim. The newcomer stepped forward, speaking with measured authority, revealing details hidden in plain sight, bringing clarity to confusion, and yet, with each word, the stakes rose higher, for understanding the truth meant confronting choices, misjudgments, and compromises that could no longer be ignored. While Kael's red eye glimmered from the shadows, a reminder that revelation often comes with challenge, that clarity often demands action, and that even subtle forces can shape monumental consequences in ways the unobservant cannot perceive. Then, as the first decisive choice was made, an elder wolf stepping aside, a younger pack member voicing loyalty in defiance of instinct, a gesture that felt small but carried enormous weight, the balance of the clearing shifted, and the energy of the confrontation intensified, a palpable storm of emotion and consequence that seemed to vibrate through the trees, through the soil, through the very air itself, and I felt my heart race in tandem with the rising tide of events, understanding that the night would not end without lasting impact. Kael moved silently closer, red eye piercing the darkness yet still unseen by most, his presence now a shadowy fulcrum of guidance and warning, and I sensed that his observation was not merely passive but strategic, an invisible hand calibrating the unfolding climax, leaving me aware that the rogue wolf's influence, subtle though it might be, would soon tip the scales in ways I could not yet predict. And then, as the confrontation reached its apex, a sudden unforeseen sound broke the charged silence, a snap of branches, a movement in the distant underbrush, something that neither the pack nor I could immediately identify, and in that instant, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the energy of the clearing frozen mid-beat, and I understood with a shock that the next moment would change everything, that the balance of trust, loyalty, and destiny had just become fragile in ways that could not be repaired by words alone, and Kael's red eye, glowing from the shadowed tree-line, seemed to convey both warning and promise, a silent signal that the next decision would shape the course of the pack, the newcomer, and myself irrevocably, leaving me suspended on the edge of action, heart pounding, mind racing, and the night charged with tension, anticipation, and a cinematic sense of inevitability, as the forest and its unseen currents waited for the moment when fate would strike and the true consequences of choice would be revealed, a cliffhanger that stretched the moment into eternity, promising that nothing would ever be the same again. The night hung heavy over the forest, a canopy of stars barely piercing the shadowed depths, and I stood at the center of the clearing, chest heaving, senses sharpened by the storm of events that had brought the pack, the newcomer, and myself to this fragile precipice of truth, destiny, and emotion, while Kael lingered at the edge of the trees, his red eye glowing faintly, catching the moonlight just enough to remind me of the silent weight he carried, a presence that had guided, tested, and observed from the shadows, and now, at the culmination of uncertainty and revelation, he finally spoke, his voice a low whisper that seemed to ripple through the air itself. Some truths demand surrender, Luna, for the path ahead cannot bend for fear alone. The word struck me like a quiet thunderclap, resonating in a place deeper than thought or reason, stirring a tumult of fear, hope, and determination that churned in my chest, and I felt the forest pulse in response, as though the very earth and trees had been waiting for this moment to acknowledge the convergence of destiny, choice, and revelation. The newcomer stood beside me, unwavering, his presence both anchor and challenge, eyes reflecting the emotions I could not yet name, and I realized that the bonds forged through trials, tension, and subtle understanding had grown into something unbreakable in ways I had not anticipated. Yet their strength required clarity, honesty, and courage that tested every fiber of my being. The pack circled around us, attentive yet respectful, their instincts attuned to the extraordinary currents that had swept through our home, sensing the tension, the truth, and the unspoken stakes, while I felt the weight of my role as Luna more acutely than ever, understanding that leadership demanded sacrifice, insight, and courage, and that the choices I made now would shape not only the lives of those I loved but the fate of the forest and the delicate threads of loyalty, trust, and destiny. Intertwined with the alpha, the newcomer, and even Kael, memories surfaced unbidden, the quiet strength of those who had come before, the lessons in patience and vigilance, the moments when instinct had guided me despite fear, and I drew from them, feeling my awareness stretch to perceive not only what was immediate but the subtle possibilities that rippled beyond sight, recognizing the fragile balance of power, influence, and emotion that now defined this night. Kael shifted in the shadows, subtle movement revealing nothing to anyone but me, and I understood that his cryptic guidance had always been more than observation. It had been shaping perception, testing resolve, and preparing me for the culmination I now faced, a force both enigmatic and inexorable, reminding me that the unseen often wields the greatest power, and that trust in intuition and instinct could be as decisive as action itself. The revelation I had glimpsed earlier, the hidden histories, the bonds fractured and restored, the truths untold, surfaced fully in my mind, each element interlocking like the pieces of a puzzle, illuminating the forest, the pack, and the hearts of those I had believed I knew so well, revealing the depth of loyalty, courage, and love that had persisted even amid uncertainty, conflict, and subtle betrayals, and I felt an unshakable connection to the threads of destiny that linked us all, binding Alpha, newcomer, and Luna in ways far more intricate than I had ever imagined. The air shifted, carrying the faint scent of Kael and something older, elemental, the energy of the forest vibrating in harmony with the choices laid before me, and I realized that transformation was not an event but a process, a surrender to awareness, trust, and the courage to act in alignment with the truth I had finally embraced, a subtle but profound sacrifice of certainty in exchange for clarity and purpose. My pulse quickened as the pack responded, each wolf instinctively aware of the change, moving in silent acknowledgement, their eyes reflecting the tension and the hope intertwined in the moment, while the newcomer reached out, not to command but to support, a gesture that carried understanding, reassurance, and quiet strength, and I felt the enormity of connection, loyalty, and trust crystallize into a force both delicate and unyielding, a current that would carry us through the remaining trials with awareness and resilience. Then, as if in response to the culmination of perception and courage, Kael's red eye gleamed once more, and his whispered line lingered in the air, echoing across the clearing and through my mind. The unseen hand shapes those willing to see beyond the shadows. The cryptic message revealed his deeper role, not as a mere observer but as a guide, a force whose presence had steered events subtly yet decisively, leaving me with a profound understanding of influence, choice, and the responsibility that accompanies knowledge. In that moment I felt the final threads of fear, doubt, and hesitation unravel, replaced by clarity, acceptance, and a quiet readiness for what lay ahead. A transformation as subtle as a shadow shifting in moonlight, yet as powerful as the tides of the forest itself, a surrender to destiny tempered by awareness, courage, and the enduring bonds I had forged, and I knew that the path forward would demand vigilance, patience, and steadfast trust, yet also promised the strength, loyalty, and connection that could carry the pack, the newcomer, and myself through the trials to come. As the forest exhaled in the stillness of night, and the pack settled into an uneasy calm, the final shimmer of Kael's eye faded into darkness, leaving me standing in the center of the clearing, heart steady, mind sharp, and spirit quietly transformed, knowing that the journey was far from over, yet that the emotional peak had been reached, revealing both the costs and rewards of truth, choice, and loyalty, and leaving the stage set for the ultimate resolution, a silent promise that the final act would demand courage, insight, and the delicate navigation of destiny itself. The first light of dawn seeped through the trees, casting golden ribbons across the forest floor, and as I stood in the quiet clearing, the tension that had gripped the pack, the newcomer, and myself finally softened into a delicate equilibrium. A sense of resolution threaded through every heartbeat and breath, while Kael lingered at the edge of the tree-line, shadowed and still, red-eye dimmed but glimmering with the memory of every choice, every warning, and every subtle influence he had exerted throughout our journey. And though he remained largely unseen, the awareness of his presence added a weight and depth to the morning that felt both protective and enigmatic, a reminder that even as one chapter closed, the world of shadows, loyalty, and destiny would continue to hum quietly beyond perception. The pack moved with a renewed ease, gestures and glances carrying acknowledgement, gratitude, and understanding, the lessons of the past trials etched in the lines of posture, the tilt of heads, and the soft breathing shared among those bound by instinct and affection, while the newcomer walked beside me, calm yet alert, our shared connection deeper for all we had faced, the unspoken trust between us no longer fragile but tempered, resilient, and quietly profound, and I felt the weight of leadership lift just enough to allow the joy of belonging, love, and shared purpose to fill the space where uncertainty had once lingered. Memories of the struggles that had tested us, conflicts, revelations, moments of tension and misjudgment, surfaced in my mind, and I recognized how each had woven us closer together, shaping bonds of loyalty and heart that could endure far beyond the night, while Kael's shadow flitted at the edge of perception, occasionally a flicker in the underbrush, sometimes a whisper carried on the wind. His presence a subtle marker of the mysteries still left to explore, and I realized that while the pack had achieved harmony for now, the forest, the shadows, and the forces we could not see would always carry a pulse of uncertainty, adventure, and latent challenge. The newcomer reached for my hand, a simple yet profound gesture, and I felt the full weight of emotional connection, of shared history, and of the courage we had drawn from one another, the sunlight catching in his eyes, reflecting hope and steadiness, while the pack circled close in quiet acknowledgement, the younger wolves bounding playfully, the elders observing with calm pride, and the alpha offering subtle nods that spoke of renewed trust and restored balance, each interaction a testament to the transformation wrought through trials, revelation, and the careful navigation of loyalty and destiny. Kael's presence became more than observation. A faint, distant howl rippled through the clearing, low and resonant, a signal that his role was never truly complete, that the forest held stories beyond even the awareness of the pack, and that while the immediate conflicts had been resolved, the threads of mystery, guidance, and destiny stretched outward, unseen but potent, promising that the echoes of our choices would ripple forward, shaping both the pack and the forest in subtle, enduring ways. The morning light intensified, illuminating dew-laden leaves, the mist retreating to reveal paths we had once feared to tread, and I felt a deep calm settle over my spirit, a recognition that the bonds formed in hardship and tension, in uncertainty and revelation, were now strong enough to weather whatever future trials might arrive, and that love, loyalty, and trust, tempered through challenge and choice, could anchor even the most fragile of hearts. As I lifted my gaze, I glimpsed Kael one last time, crouched atop a distant hill, red eye faintly glowing like a dying ember, his form dissolving slowly into the mist, and a faint whisper reached my ears, almost carried by the wind, almost imagined. Even shadows can guide the light, Luna. The words lingered, a cryptic promise that while our current story had reached its conclusion, the forest and its mysteries, our bonds and destinies, were far from finished, leaving the heart open to wonder, vigilance, and the quiet thrill of untold possibilities. I turned back to the pack, to the newcomer, and to the clearing that had been both crucible and sanctuary, and I breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the rising sun wash over my face, the forest alive with movement, sound, and life, each element a symbol of renewal, resilience, and the enduring power of choice, connection, and destiny. And I knew, in that singular, unforgettable moment, that we had reached not an end but a profound beginning, one marked by love, loyalty, and the quiet knowledge that every shadow holds a story, every whisper carries weight, and every heartbeat connects us to the mysteries that surround us, while Kael's final presence, a shadow fading into dawn, a distant howl, a cryptic phrase, left a mark on the soul, indelible and haunting, a lasting echo of a journey that had tested hearts, revealed truths, and bound us forever to the rhythms of the forest, the pack, and the unseen currents of destiny that would carry us forward.